Hey everyone, just wanted to do a quick tour of the workshop. I'm going to start over here. This is a Spectracom net clock. I have a GPS antenna outside, and this outputs a 10 megahertz signal, which I use as a frequency standard for any of my frequency-based test equipment like the counter, signal generators, spectrum analyzer, etc. Works well, and got a lot of bins of various components all over the basement here. All right, and onto the main area. I've got a Tektronix 11403A. It's a giant modular oscilloscope from the late 80s. Actually, this one is from the early 90s. It's their first touchscreen scope. It's actually got a CRT in it. You can have up to 12 channels. This one actually has the really rare 3 gigahertz amplifier module in it. I don't really use it, but the price was right, and it was a pretty cool piece of gear to play around with. Got a Tektronix 575 curve tracer. Really cool tool for testing and matching transistors, testing things like Zener diodes, neon bulbs. Really has a whole lot of uses. From the late 50s, early 60s, has about 40 vacuum tubes in it. Nowadays you probably just get one of these guys. The Peak DCA 75 Pro. I use that for the quick tests, but every once in a while you want to power a transistor with a higher voltage and a higher current, like it might behave in an actual circuit, to see if it's faulty. So yeah, just a great piece of equipment. This one's in really nice shape. Had to do a little bit of work on it when I got it, but it should be good for another 50 years. Over here I've got an analog scope, the 2247A, which is a nice scope. It has a lot of features that were found on digital scopes, like cursors, voltmeter, counter built into it. So there's a lot of uses for an analog scope still. Got some RF gear here. Got a HP 8644B signal generator for AM and FM alignments. Definitely overkill for radio equipment, but you know, doesn't get much better than this. Got the HP 8904A signal generator, which I use in conjunction with the 8644B, since the 8644B doesn't have the ability to do FM stereo modulation on its own. This guy here will take care of the FM stereo. You feed it into the external FM modulation input. Got an HP 5342A frequency counter. It's overkill for the type of work I do, but I wanted it because it's the only one they make in this form factor here, so it sits right on top of the signal generator next to the other signal generator. Goes from 10 hertz to 18 gigahertz. All right, and on the main bench, got a bunch of power supplies. Triple output power supply on the bottom has a positive and negative 20 volt rail and a 5 volt rail. This Kepco high voltage power supply here, I like quite a bit. 80 milliamps, 500 volts. It's very useful for doing capacitor leakage tests or reforming old capacitors before you fire up an old piece of equipment, if it's one that you don't want to replace for whatever reason. Got a newer Siglent power supply, another power supply. Got a bunch of Simpson meters. I like the Simpson meters. I really like this little microamp meter here. I use that in conjunction with this high voltage power supply to monitor the process of reforming a capacitor or doing a leakage test. Got a 400 watt DC load here. And then my favorite piece of equipment, this Tektronix TDS 5054B digital scope. Has a nice big, I think 10-inch screen, 4 channels, 500 megahertz. Really easy to use interface. It's a touch screen. It's a full-blown computer inside, so you can take screenshots and different things right on it and copy them over the network to another device. And it still has all the knobs you would expect a scope to have, unlike some other ones like this this Siglent here, which I don't really use too often anymore. Nice small scope, has a lot of features, but you got to go through the menus to change everything, which I'm really not a fan of. It's just kind of clunky and slow, but Still not a bad scope. Oh yeah, and of course a couple fluke meters. Everyone's got to have a couple of them. Got a Siglent. It's a 3.2 gigahertz spectrum analyzer and vector network analyzer. Over here, there's a Spectracom. It's a distribution amplifier for the 10 megahertz signal coming out of the net clock. It's not hooked up yet, but I'll be able to, send the signal to up to 12 pieces of gear using that. Below that, I've got a newer Rohde & Schwarz signal generator that's also used for tuner alignments. This one does FM stereo right within it, so I don't need to use the 8904 HP. Not sure which setup I'm going to keep yet. For now, I got both of them going, this and the HP stuff. They both work equally well. This one's kind of neat because it's got a external left and right input on the back that you can hook a music source up to and basically make your own little radio station with very high quality source material, so you can see what a tuner would really sound like if radio stations were putting out high quality signals, which isn't always the case these days. And then below that, another really cool piece of gear. It's a Levier, also known as Panasonic, VP7725 distortion analyzer. It's a 2-channel distortion analyzer, has a ultra low distortion signal source in it. So this is great for measuring high-end low distortion audio equipment. It's got some monitor jacks on the back that actually go to the scope, so it's showing the signal that it's seeing right now on this scope. And then this is connected down here to my dummy load, which is either 4 or 8 ohms. Handles quite a bit of power for a good amount of time with this giant heatsink. Built that myself. And then over here, I've got a dim bulb tester, which right now it has a 40 watt bulb in it, but I have a whole bunch of bulbs up to 300 depending on what I'm working on. A Variac, pretty large Variac. I believe that actually does up to 15 amps. And then a trip light isolation transformer, and it was modified since these isolation transformers were really designed for computers or medical equipment. They weren't true isolation transformers from a safety perspective. There's a couple mods you got to do on the inside, so if you buy one of these, don't just plug it in and think you're safe. Over here in the middle, got this actually DMM Check Plus for it's a calibration reference for your digital multimeters. Kind of neat to test them out when you buy them. Newer Siglent function generator, still has a lot of uses. Use that for AM alignments mostly, and other signals I can't generate with other HP equipment. Got a Siglent 5.5 digit multimeter and an old Agilent multimeter with the VFD. I like the VFD display since it doesn't ghost as much as the LCD on the Siglent when you're getting fast updates. Also have a RCA Senior Voltohmist VTVM. The zero center function on that's handy when you're doing like an FM discriminator. And then other equipment, you got to have an old HP calculator. It's the 11C, not the 15C, but it does everything I need. And a DUR EE LCR meter. Also does everything I need for measuring capacitors, inductors. Use it for resistors as well. I want to measure them at different frequencies. That's it for the main bench. Got the soldering and assembly bench over here. This is where I actually replace components on the gear. Got a Hakko, I think it's an FR301 desoldering gun. Probably one of the most useful tools I've bought here. Really makes work go fast compared to using Wick. It was a lot of money, but as soon as I got it, I realized it was worth every penny. In some ways, I wish I bought the better one, which has the pistol grip. You can take the handle off and make it more just like an iron, kind of like that. But this is good. Got a newer Pace soldering station here. Got a nice small iron, a lot of power. And the other reason I bought this was because I can use their surface mount tweezers with it for removing surface mount components when I need to, a whole lot faster than the other methods. And then Another important piece of equipment, this Hakko fume extractor. A lot of this old equipment I work on has some really nasty flux and dirt and other crap on it that you really don't want to breathe in. I had a little homemade one I was using for a while, but I went and spent the money on this. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny. Here it is under the table. I bought this little switch on Amazon for about 10 bucks to turn that on or off, because I don't want to reach down there whenever I have to turn it on, and I don't want to leave it on since I don't want to wear the filter out faster than it could last. Then up here, all sorts of different components, a lot of cleaners, different deoxit, adhesives, heatsink compound, oils, things like that. Yeah, that's about it. Oh, and one more thing, a little messy over here, but I've got the Prusa i3 MK3S Plus, and that definitely comes in handy for working on some of this old gear. I've made a lot of different parts. You can make feet for devices that are missing the feet out of different types of rubber filament. I've made a lot of adapters for installing capacitors in equipment. You know, you can print a 3D printed adapter to install a capacitor in place of one of those metal can capacitors that are not always available, or the replacements are a lot of money. And as long as it's not something that you see on the outside, this is a totally viable solution. So I definitely recommend this printer. Much better than the old ANET A8 I used in the past, which is in the background there. All right, that's it. Have a good night.